conflict in Sudan could pose a threat to the regional stability from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa to the Red Sea. This is the latest warning from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. He says the Sudanese people are living through unspeakable atrocities and 750,000 are facing catastrophic food insecurity and famine conditions in North Darfur displacement sites. Our Washington correspondent Fraser Jackson spoke to the U.S. State Department's Special Envoy for Sudan, Tom Perriello. He started by asking him what more the international community could do to ease the suffering of the Sudanese people.
Well, the international community remains united, but needs to be more intense in its demands for absolute access to food and medicine for Sudanese people in all 18 states. That's north, south, east, and west. You have tens of millions of Sudanese that are facing starvation. And not only does that mean death, disease, and cholera, but it means people subjected to horrific kinds of exploitation, sexual slavery, and other kinds of abuses. The international community must demand an end to this, full humanitarian access by both the SAF and the RSF. In addition to that, we need to raise the costs on those that are conducting these horrific abuses. The United States, under the Biden administration, has led the way with sanctions of both individuals and companies that are behind these horrific atrocities. We've helped lead under Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield's leadership the extension of the Darfur arms embargo. We need to give that the teeth of enforcement, which looks like it's moving forward at the United Nations now. We cannot let these abuses stand.
Well, speaking of the UN, recently Antonio Guterres said at present the conditions do not exist for a successful deployment of a UN force to protect civilians in Sudan. Does the US believe a UN-led force on the ground is needed to stop the violence?
Well, so many things are needed. The question is, what can we do right now? And right now we're focused on working with our African counterparts and Gulf counterparts to find a ceasefire for the whole country, but also looking at local pauses, humanitarian pauses that can allow safe access to markets and to water. When you have something like a cholera epidemic, it's directly tied to access to drinkable water. So in each one of these communities, we're talking about families, mothers facing horrific choices. We, along with the United Nations and the African Union, need to be demanding action on this for that humanitarian access and a pause to the violence.
But does the US believe that a UN force is the only way to stop the violence?
It's not. This is a war of choice. This is a famine of choice. This was not a famine that was created by a tsunami or a disease or a drought. It was two men, Hameti and Burhan, that decided to go to war. First, they joined forces to overthrow the civilian transition that the Sudanese people had so clearly demanded in 2019, and then having this fight for power and control over the country. The only path forward is to restore that civilian transition, the aspirations of the Sudanese people. This was a war of choice. It can be a peace of choice, and we need those leaders to choose the path of peace.
The seasonal rains have ended in Sudan now. Is the US bracing for the fighting to get worse over the coming months?
Well, first of all, we need to make sure that as the rains recede, we get food and medicine pouring in with the same intensity we saw with the rains. We've made some progress in terms of access points from the east on the Daba Road, down through the south in Sinnar, and the west through the Adre border crossing. We need the government to extend that border access today. They need to allow the kind of humanitarian flights into area like Kadugli and Dongolo. We've been trying to land humanitarian flights for almost 3 months. Those are entire communities in places like Kadugli that do not have access because the army and its body, the HAC, have prevented those flights from moving. We need that flight access now, that border access now. As those rains have receded, we should be able to get to more of the millions of Sudanese that are facing that kind of starvation and isolation at the same time that we look for ways to decrease the violence itself.
And finally, the US has given over $2 billion worth of aid to Sudan since April 2023. There's no getting away from the fact that there is a US election in around a week's time from now. What does the political uncertainty in the United States look like in terms of aid and the future of aid in Sudan?
The United States' commitment to the people of Sudan is very clear, and it is very bipartisan. There is tremendous support from both Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, along with the Biden administration and previous administrations. That's why we've led the way on humanitarian aid. It's why we've led the way on sanctioning those individuals and companies that are doing horrible things to the Sudanese people. That commitment to the Sudanese people and its future remains very strong regardless of our election outcome. The key is for the Sudanese to one day soon have the same opportunity to vote for their future leaders that I had the opportunity to exercise this weekend in my hometown. We look forward to that as the future for Sudan, but first we have to end this war.